The toast was to 50 years. Then my grandfather clutched his chest, looked straight at my father, and said the words that shattered our family forever. It wasn't a heart attack. It was a confession. And the secret he'd kept for 3 decades turned our celebration into a crime scene. This is the story of the Grant family reunion, where a lifetime of respect was destroyed in a single breath. For 50 years, Joseph Grant was our rock, a war hero, a devoted husband, the man who built everything we had. Until that moment, we believed our legacy was built on honor. His dying confession revealed it was built on a lie. And the question every one of us faced was simple: did we ever really know him at all? To understand the weight of that lie, you have to understand the man we thought we knew. Joseph Grant returned from Vietnam in 1971 with a Silver Star and a silence he never broke. He used his military loan to buy a failing auto parts store in Dayton, Ohio. Within 10 years, Grant Automotive was a regional chain. He married my grandmother, Alina, in 1975. Their wedding photo sat on every mantelpiece. His uniform, her smile, the perfect American beginning. He built more than a business. He built a mythology. At family dinners, he was the undisputed patriarch. His stories of hard work and integrity were our scripture. He funded college tuitions, gave stern but fair advice, and expected one thing in return: absolute loyalty to the Grant name. My father, Michael, his eldest son, worked beside him for 30 years, being groomed to take over. My aunt, Rebecca, became the company's head of finance. Our entire lives orbited his son. The reunion was for their golden anniversary. 50 years. It was meant to be a crown on his legacy. Everyone was coming. All 3 children, their spouses, 7 grandchildren, even cousins from out west. My mother spent months planning. It would be at the old lake house, the one Joseph built with his first big profit. The place was a shrine to his success. Mounted fish, polished wood, a wall of awards from the Chamber of Commerce. But in the weeks before, small cracks appeared. Joseph became withdrawn. He'd cancel meetings at the store, something he'd never done. My father found him once just staring at the war medals in his study. When asked, Joseph just waved him off. "Just tired, Mike." Then the strange request. He insisted my Uncle David be invited. David was the black sheep, a recovering addict who'd been estranged for nearly a decade after a bitter fight over money. "It's time," was all Joseph said. No one argued. The day arrived. Sunny, late September. The lake was calm. The house was full of noise and the smell of roasted meat. Joseph held court on the porch, but his smile seemed strained, a performance. He hugged David awkwardly, a moment thick with unspoken history. During the pre-dinner cocktails, my cousin Sarah, who just finished law school, asked him about the Silver Star. It was a story we'd all heard 100 times. How his unit was ambushed, how he dragged 2 men to safety under fire. But this time he froze, his glass trembled. "Not today, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice rough. "Some stories aren't for telling." An odd chill passed through the room. Alina quickly changed the subject. We brushed it off. The stress of the event, we thought, the emotion of having everyone together. Dinner was served. The long table groaned with food. Joseph sat at the head, Alina to his right. Toasts began. My father stood first, speaking of Joseph's unwavering principles, calling him his hero. Then Rebecca toasted their parents' enduring love. The mood was warm, sentimental. Then it was Joseph's turn. He stood slowly. He looked old suddenly under the bright dining room chandelier. He cleared his throat, scanning every face, his children, his brother, his grandchildren. His eyes were glistening. 50 years, he began, his voice low. You build a life, you build it on what you think is solid ground. You tell yourself the ends justify the means, that the secret you carry is for the good of the family. A confused silence fell. This wasn't a toast. My grandmother reached for his hand. "Joe, not now." He pulled his hand away. "It has to be now, I've carried it too long." His face was pale. He looked directly at my father. "Mike, the store, the money that started it all, it wasn't the loan," he gasped, his hand flying to his chest. A glass tipped over. "It was Jimmy's money, I took it. I told them he was dead." Jimmy, his younger brother, the one we were told died a hero in the same ambush that earned Joseph his star. the one whose name was only ever spoken in reverent whispers. Joseph's knees buckled. He gripped the tablecloth, dragging plates and silverware with him as he collapsed to the floor. Chaos erupted, screams. Someone yelled to call 911. My father dropped beside him, cradling his head, but Joseph wasn't finished. His breathing was a ragged whistle, but his eyes were locked on my father's, burning with a desperate truth. He didn't die there, he choked out. I left him, and I took the trust fund our parents left him to start the business. Everything we have is built on that. Then his eyes rolled back. The confession hung in the air, more violent than the heart attack that followed. The legacy was not just a lie, it was a theft. And the hero we had gathered to celebrate was, in his final conscious moment, a self-condemned man. The ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, but the real damage was already done. The foundation of our family had just been erased, and one terrifying question remained. If Jimmy Grant didn't die in Vietnam, where was he? The hospital waiting room became our war room. Shock had a half-life. As Joseph fought for his life in surgery, it decayed into a corrosive mix of grief, rage, and a single burning directive: find the truth. My grandmother, Alina, sat statue still, her face a mask of shattered devotion. The children, my father Michael, Aunt Rebecca, and Uncle David, clustered in a tense huddle. The golden anniversary was now a crime scene interrogation. The first fracture appeared within an hour. David, the estranged brother, spoke through clenched teeth. I knew it. I always knew there was a rot in his perfect story. He revealed that their parents, our great-grandparents, had left equal trust funds for Joseph and Jimmy, a substantial sum for the time, $50,000 each. When Jimmy died, David said, making vicious air quotes, Joseph told the lawyers Jimmy's share should revert to the family business to honor his memory. He was the executor. No one questioned a war hero. My father, pale and shaking, defended the man he'd worshipped. He's confused, the pain, the medication, he's a hero. The military confirmed it, but Rebecca, the numbers person, was already coldly calculating. The initial loan for Grant Automotive was $47,000. The VA business loan he always cited was for $20,000. Where did the other $27,000 come from, Mike? The room went silent. The math was a first, quiet verdict. We didn't wait for Joseph to wake up. The search began that night. My father and I drove back to the lake house, now feeling like a haunted monument. We went straight to Joseph's locked study. He'd always called it his memory room. We broke the lock. What we found wasn't memory, it was evidence. In a fireproof lockbox, buried under his medals, were documents that turned the confession from a nightmare into a paper trail. The executed will of our great-grandparents. A probate document showing the release of James, Jimmy, Grant's trust fund to Joseph as executor, dated 1972. And a bank deposit slip for $47,000 into a new business account for Grant Automotive, dated 1 week later. The myth of the bootstrap loan was vaporized by carbon-copied ink. But the most chilling find was a folded, brittle letter. It was from Jimmy, postmarked Saigon, 1971. The handwriting was rushed, desperate. Joe, they're moving us to a new position. Intel says it's hot. If something happens, remember your promise to Mom and Dad. Look after my share, make it mean something. It was a brother's trust written in the shadow of war, not a will, a request. Joseph had treated it as a license to steal. We took everything. Back at the hospital, we showed Rebecca and David. David's face darkened with a lifetime of vindication. Rebecca's turned to stone. This is fraud, she said flatly. Executor fraud. The statute of limitations might be complex, but the moral debt, that's infinite. Then a new variable. A nurse approached. Joseph was stable, sedated, but out of surgery. And he'd been asking for something specific before they put him under. Not for Alina, not for his children. He'd mumbled repeatedly for a small black address book in his bedside table at home. We raced back. In the drawer we found it, a cheap leather-bound book from the 70s, and on a page marked with a faded ribbon, a phone number with a California area code. No name. Just the number and a date scribbled next to it, called 85. My father stared at it. Why would he have a California number from 40 years ago? Rebecca, ever practical, took out her phone. Only one way to know. She dialed, putting it on speaker. We huddled around, hearts pounding. It rang and rang, then a click. A recorded voice, elderly but clear, answered. "You've reached the home of James and Marlene. We can't come to the phone right now. Leave a message." James, Jimmy. The blood drained from my father's face. The room tilted. The brother who was supposed to be buried in a hero's grave in Vietnam had a home in California, and a wife named Marlene. Joseph hadn't just stolen from a dead man. He'd stolen from a living one. He had known, at least as late as 1985, that Jimmy was alive, and he had never said a word. The moral crime had just exploded into something infinitely darker. This wasn't just theft. It was a conscious, ongoing erasure of a living person. The foundation of our family wasn't just built on stolen money. It was built on the silent tomb of a man they'd left behind. The question was no longer about the past. It was about the present. Where was Jimmy Grant now? And what would happen when a ghost learned his death had been so profitable? The mission split in two. My father, clinging to the last shreds of his father's image, insisted we focus on Joseph's medical crisis. He couldn't face the living brother, but Rebecca and David formed an alliance of the disillusioned. They hired a private investigator in California that very night, giving him the phone number and the name James Grant. The PI's first report came back in 24 hours, and it contained a bombshell that made the stolen money seem like a petty theft. The number was linked to an address in a modest suburb of San Diego. The resident was indeed James Grant, age 74. He was a retired machinist. He had been married to Marlene for 45 years. They had 2 children, and according to a cursory public records search, James Grant had filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy in 1992. The cause: catastrophic medical debt after a serious workplace injury. The filing showed he'd lost his home. He had no significant assets. While our family lived in comfort, funded by his stolen inheritance, Jimmy Grant had been fighting poverty and ruin. The weight of this was suffocating. David slammed his fist on the table. He was struggling to survive, and our father was using his money to buy lakefront property. Rebecca, now in full legal triage mode, saw the immediate threat. If he's alive, he's the legal owner of that trust. With interest and damages, what we owe him could be. It could dismantle everything. The business. The houses, everything. A cold war erupted within the family. My father and Alina, in their grief, wanted to protect Joseph's name and the family's stability. They spoke of handling this privately, of making amends without legal exposure. Rebecca and David demanded full disclosure and immediate financial preparation for restitution. The unity Joseph had demanded his whole life was shattered. We were now plaintiffs and defendants in the same family. I was tasked with the deepest dive. To understand the original sin, I had to trace Jimmy's path. Using Joseph's old Marine Corps unit information, I contacted a veterans archive. I requested any records on Private First Class James Grant. What came back was not a death certificate, but a transfer order. In late 1971, Jimmy was indeed listed as wounded in action, not killed. He was transferred to a military hospital in Japan, and then, shockingly, discharged honorably in early 1972. The official record showed he came home, but our family record showed he did not. Joseph had told everyone Jimmy died a hero's death. He had even held a memorial service. I found the faded program in a family album, in loving memory of James Arthur Grant. There were dates, a photo, prayers, a complete fiction performed with full solemnity. Why? The money was one motive, but to fake your own brother's death that required something else, a deeper shame or a deeper fear. The PI in California made contact. He couldn't speak to Jimmy directly yet, but he'd talked to a neighbor. The story he gleaned was fragmentary but telling. James Grant was a quiet man. He rarely spoke of his family back east. He once mentioned a falling out. He'd worked hard his whole life. The neighbor said, "He's a good man, had some tough luck. He gets a VA pension, but it's not much. He and Marlene get by." A VA pension. For a man our family had buried. The grotesque irony was overwhelming. Joseph had built an empire on Jimmy's stolen future, while Jimmy himself survived on a government stipend for the wound he'd actually suffered. The injustice was so vast it felt fictional. Then Joseph woke up. The doctors warned us he was weak, his mind might be foggy. We entered his ICU room as a divided council. He looked small in the bed, tethered to machines. His eyes found us. There was no defiance left, only a hollowed-out fear. My father, his voice breaking, held up the bank slip. "Dad, the money, Jimmy's trust. Is it true?" Joseph closed his eyes. A single tear tracked through the stubble on his cheek. He gave the smallest nod. "All true," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. "Every word." Rebecca stepped forward, her tone forensic. "The phone number in California, Dad. You called him in '85. You knew he was alive. Why did you never tell us? Why did you let us believe he was dead?" Joseph's eyes flew open, wide with a panic that wasn't about money. It was raw, primal fear. "You found the book," he gasped. He tried to sit up, monitors beeping an alarm. Don't contact him, you don't understand." He was trembling now. "It wasn't just the money. I didn't just leave him behind, I made sure he stayed gone." The room went cold. "Made sure he stayed gone." The words hung in the sterile air, heavier than any confession of theft. My father's face, already a map of grief, crumpled into something worse, dawning horror. The crime was no longer passive. It was active. It was willful. And Joseph, from his hospital bed, was about to confess to something far beyond fraud. He closed his eyes, gathering strength from a reservoir of shame. The story that trickled out, broken by wheezing breaths, rewrote our history a second time. 1971. The ambush was real. Chaos, smoke, screaming. Jimmy was hit in the leg. Joseph, panicked, dragged him behind a rock. But then the enemy closed in. "I saw my chance," Joseph whispered, his voice a ghost. "A medevac was loading the worst cases. I told the corpsman he was gone, a head wound. I pointed to another body. I said he was my brother. They took that body instead." He had declared his own brother dead on the battlefield. He left Jimmy, wounded and conscious, behind enemy lines. I thought he'd be captured or killed. It was a mercy in my mind. But Jimmy wasn't captured. He was found hours later by a different unit. He was evacuated, hospitalized, and eventually sent home. A bureaucratic miracle, but a personal catastrophe. By the time Jimmy made it back to the world, Joseph had already written the legend of his heroic death, and more importantly, had begun the process of claiming his inheritance. The first letter came in 1973. Jimmy, recovered but shattered, wrote to Joseph. He was alive. He was in California. He needed help. Joseph's response wasn't relief or reunion. It was terror. If Jimmy came back, the lie would unravel. The money, the hero's narrative, the entire foundation of his new life would collapse. So Joseph wrote back. He told Jimmy a story of his own, that their parents had died of grief after hearing of his death, that the family home was lost, that there was nothing left for him in Ohio. And then the threat. "If you come back," Joseph wrote, "you'll be seen as a deserter, a ghost causing trouble. The Army's records are a mess. Who will they believe? The Silver Star hero or the man who disappeared?" He weaponized his own fabricated heroism to imprison his brother in silence. He sent Jimmy a one-time payment of $5,000, a fraction of the trust, with a clear message. "Take this, start over, and never contact me again. Consider yourself dead to this family because you are." Jimmy, traumatized and believing his own family was gone, accepted the deal. The call in 1985 was a desperate, final plea. Jimmy's wife was sick. He needed real help. Joseph, in a moment of cold finality, repeated his threat and hung up. He made sure he stayed gone by enforcing his brother's exile with psychological warfare. The ICU monitor beeped in the silence that followed. The theft was monstrous. This was diabolical. My father stood up and walked out without a word. The hero had not just fallen, he had never existed. The man in the bed was a stranger who had built a kingdom on a twin foundation of theft and coercion. The family council that night was a funeral for our old lives. Rebecca, now in full command, laid out the brutal facts. First, the legal exposure. Jimmy could sue for the stolen trust fund with compounded interest, punitive damages, and emotional distress. Conservatively, it could exceed $10 million. Second, the business. Grant Automotive's founding story was a fraud. If this went public, contracts could be voided, the brand destroyed. Third, the VA. Joseph's Silver Star was never in question, but his account of the battle was perjured. Could benefits be revoked? Could he face charges? It was a house of cards in a hurricane. David, vibrating with a lifetime of resentment, demanded immediate, full disclosure to Jimmy and the authorities. "We have to get ahead of this. We are accomplices if we don't." My mother and Alina pleaded for time for Joseph's failing health, but the decision was taken out of our hands. Our private investigator in California, acting on his initial mandate, had made contact. He'd spoken to Marlene, Jimmy's wife, and she had told Jimmy everything. The ghost knew he had been robbed. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived at Rebecca's law office. It was from an attorney in San Diego representing James A. Grant. The language was formal, icy, and devastating. It stated that Mr. Grant had recently become aware of the fraudulent conversion of his inheritance by his brother, Joseph Grant. It demanded a full accounting of all assets derived from said funds, immediate restitution of the principal with interest calculated from 1972, and damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The letter gave us 30 days to respond before filing a civil lawsuit. Attached was a photocopy of Jimmy's own bank records from 1972, showing the withdrawal of his entire trust fund by his executor, Joseph. The paper trail was a knife. Panic turned into logistical dread. Rebecca estimated that satisfying the demand would require liquidating the business, the lake house, and my father's own home. Our entire way of life was on the chopping block, but a worse fear gnawed at me. What did Jimmy Grant look like? What had 50 years of enforced exile done to him? I needed to see the man whose life had been cannibalized for hours. Using the PI's contacts, I found a yearbook photo from Jimmy's high school. The resemblance to Joseph was startling but softer. Then I found a driver's license photo from 2010. The face was weathered, the eyes carried a permanent sadness, but there was no malice there, just a profound weariness. He looked like the kind man his neighbor described. He did not look like a vengeful ghost. He looked like a tired grandfather. The dissonance was unbearable. My father, in his own turmoil, made a secret decision. He called the San Diego attorney without telling us. He begged for a chance to make things right, to avoid a lawsuit that would destroy both families. The attorney, after consulting with Jimmy, agreed to one condition: a face-to-face meeting. Not with lawyers, not with the whole family. Just my father, the son of the betrayer, and Jimmy, the betrayed. It was a reckoning he could not refuse. The night before he flew to California, my father showed me what he was taking. In a small case, he had the original probate documents, the bank slip, and the faded letter from Saigon. He also had a cashier's check. It was for $200,000, almost every liquid asset he and my mother had. "It's a gesture," he said, his voice hollow. "It's not nearly enough, but it's a start." He also had a recorder. "I need you to hear it," he said to me. "Whatever he says, you need to know." The meeting was set for a neutral place, a quiet park overlooking the Pacific. My father went alone. I waited by the phone 1,200 miles away, a knot of anxiety in my gut. He called 3 hours later. He didn't speak for a long moment. I could hear the ocean wind and his ragged breathing. "He's here," my father finally said, his voice choked. "And he's not what I expected. He's forgiven me." The story my father told next shattered every assumption we had about vengeance. Jimmy Grant, now 74, had not greeted my father with anger. He had greeted him with a sad, knowing calm. He confirmed every detail of Joseph's confession: the abandoned wound, the stolen money, the threatening letters. But then he said something that changed the entire axis of the story. "I knew, deep down, my brother was a coward," Jimmy said, according to my father's recording. "Not on the battlefield, but in his soul. He was always terrified of being nothing. I pitied him. The money, it let me walk away from that version of my family forever. In a way, he did me a favor." Jimmy had built a life, however modest, on honesty. He had his wife, his children, his integrity. He didn't want to destroy us. He didn't want a public war. The lawsuit threat, his attorney later admitted, was a necessary formality to get our attention. What Jimmy wanted was simple and far more devastating than money: acknowledgement. A formal legal declaration that he was James Grant, alive. A correction of the historical record. And a private, family apology from Joseph. The cashier's check, he refused it. "That's blood money from a story I don't belong to," he said. "I don't want your guilt. I want my name back." My father, prepared for a fight, was disarmed by grace. He offered the only thing he could: the truth. He promised to help Jimmy legally reclaim his identity, to amend the false death record, to tell the entire family the true story. They parted not as enemies, but as two wounded men connected by a terrible secret. Jimmy's final words to my father were, "Tell Joe the war over. He can stop fighting." We played the recording for the family. Eleanor wept. David was stunned into silence. Rebecca immediately saw the path forward: a quiet, legal rectification, a private settlement to compensate Jimmy for the lost decades without destroying the business. It was a miracle of mercy we did not deserve. But one person could not accept it: Joseph. When my father returned to the hospital and told him of the meeting, of Jimmy's forgiveness, Joseph did not find peace. He found a deeper, more terrifying fear. "You don't understand," he rasped, his agitation spiking the heart monitor. "You told him where I am. You showed him the documents." We thought he was afraid of facing his brother. We were wrong. He was afraid of something else entirely. The next morning, a federal agent from the Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General was waiting in the hospital lobby. He wanted to speak to Joseph Grant regarding discrepancies in his benefit claims and the narrative surrounding his Silver Star. The agent was polite, firm, and carried a file. Someone had filed an anonymous tip. The timing could not be a coincidence. We looked at each other, a new suspicion forming. Had Jimmy, after all, decided on a different kind of justice? But as we would learn in the coming hours, the tip did not come from California. It came from within our own family. The final betrayal was not from the ghost we had wronged. It was from the last person we would ever suspect. And their motive had nothing to do with money or truth or forgiveness. It was about burning the entire legacy to the ground. The agent's visit was a detonator. We retreated to the hospital chapel, a hollowed-out group, and demanded answers from each other. Who called the VA? David swore it wasn't him. Rebecca, the lawyer, would never invite that scrutiny. My father was a wreck. Then we looked at Eleanor. Her hands were steady, her eyes dry. "I did it," she said. Her voice was calm, final. "I called them this morning." 50 years of devoted silence had broken into a calculated strike. Her reason was not revenge, she said. It was accountability. "He confessed to you," she said, looking at her children. "But he will never confess to the world. He'll die a hero in the newspapers. That man in the bed is not my husband. My husband died at that dinner table when he told his first true story, so I am returning the gift he gave Jimmy. I am erasing his legend." It was the coldest, most devastating act of the entire saga. The wife was dismantling the husband's life, not for money but for truth. Joseph's greatest fear, exposure, was being orchestrated by the person he trusted most. My father begged her to recant, to say it was a mistake. She refused. "The truth is a debt, Michael. He owes it. We all do." The VA investigation became a new, slow-moving avalanche. Joseph was formally interviewed from his hospital bed. With Eleanor's statement and the evidence we'd gathered, his story unraveled. He admitted to falsifying the account of Jimmy's death to the corpsmen. The Silver Star, awarded for valor in that same firefight, was not revoked. His actions saving other men were verified, but the official narrative was permanently scarred with a footnote of deceit. More critically, the VA opened a review of his pension and benefits, questioning if they had been obtained under false pretenses. The hero's pedestal was now administrative quicksand. While that machinery ground on, we turned to the only path left: making things right with Jimmy. Led by Rebecca, we drafted a formal settlement proposal. We offered him a 20% ownership stake in Grant Automotive, backdated with dividends for the past 10 years. We offered to purchase a mortgage-free home for him and Marlene in San Diego. And we offered a formal public correction of the record, a joint statement from the Grant family acknowledging James A. Grant's survival and his honorable service. It was not full restitution, that was impossible, but it was a foundation. Jimmy and Marlene, with their own attorney, came to Ohio. The meeting was held in Rebecca's law office, not the lake house. The atmosphere was surreal, a business negotiation to resolve a 50-year trauma. Jimmy walked in, leaning on a cane. Seeing him in person was a shock. He was Joseph, but softer, weary, without the granite arrogance. He looked at us not with hatred, but with a profound, quiet pity. He accepted the terms with one staggering amendment. He refused the backdated dividends. "I don't want money from years I didn't own," he said. "The stake moving forward is enough. The house is a kindness. The statement, that's what I came for." His priority was clearing his name for his children and grandchildren. He wanted the obituary rewritten while he was alive to read it. We agreed. The legal documents were signed. The war was over, not with a bang, but with the quiet scratch of pens. The following week, we published the correction in the Dayton newspaper. It was a small, precise box on page 6. Correction: a previous memorial notice for James Arthur Grant was published in error. Mr. Grant is alive and well in California. The Grant family regrets the error and any distress it caused. It was the most expensive 5 lines in the history of our family. Joseph was discharged to a long-term care facility, his health irreparably broken. Alina visited him once. She told us she placed a copy of the newspaper correction on his bedside table. She said he looked at it, then out the window, and spoke his last words to her. "You were always stronger than me." She never went back. Their 50-year marriage ended not with death, but with a quiet, permanent severance. The business survived, but transformed. My father, burdened by the weight of management and the tainted origin story, decided to sell his majority share. Rebecca and David, in an unlikely alliance, used the settlement with Jimmy as a catalyst to buy him out. They rebranded the company as Grant & Grant Automotive, formally adding Jimmy's name to the corporate charter. It was a symbolic cleansing. The empire was now legitimately, legally, shared with the man it had stolen from. I thought that was the end. The lie was exposed, debts were being paid, a grim new equilibrium found. But history, once disturbed, keeps revealing layers. A month after the settlement, a package arrived for me from Marlene. Inside was a bundle of Jimmy's old letters from Vietnam, which she thought I might want for our family archive. As I gently sorted through them, a small, folded photograph slipped out. It was a picture of Joseph and Jimmy, taken just before deployment. They were arms around each other's shoulders, grinning, impossibly young. On the back, in Jimmy's handwriting, it said, "Me and Joe, he promised to get me home." But paperclipped behind it was another photo, one that stopped my heart. The same era, but this one showed Joseph alone, standing with a Vietnamese woman in front of a small shop. They looked close, familiar, and in her arms she held a toddler. On the back, in Joseph's handwriting, was a date, 1970, and a name, Lee and Mai. The timeline screamed at me. 1970, a year before the ambush, a year before Jimmy's death. I confronted my father with the photo. He had never seen it. With a trembling voice, he told me a story he'd heard only once when he was a teenager and Joseph had drunk too much bourbon. Joseph had spoken of a woman he loved over there, a market seller's daughter. He said he had to leave her. He said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. He never mentioned a child. The stolen trust fund, the desperate need for capital, the ruthless severing of ties with Jimmy. The motivations suddenly crystallized with a horrifying new clarity. It wasn't just greed or ambition. It was panic. Had Joseph been sending money back to Vietnam? Was the stolen inheritance funding another, hidden family across the ocean? Was his entire life here not just a lie, but a desperate attempt to fund a secret life elsewhere? We will likely never know the full truth. Joseph cannot answer. That secret, if it exists, died with him. But the photograph remains. It is the final, unanswerable question. It suggests that the betrayal of Jimmy was not an isolated act of cowardice, but part of a deeper, more complex web of desperation. The patriarch who collapsed at the dinner table was not just a thief and a liar. He was a man fractured by multiple lives, multiple debts, and a war that broke him in ways we are only beginning to fathom. The reunion was the end of the family we knew. What has emerged from the ashes is something quieter, harder, and more honest. My father moved to a smaller town, seeking peace. Rebecca and David run the business with a transparency that borders on obsessive. I speak to Jimmy once a month. He sends pictures of his grandchildren. We are, in a broken way, a family again. Not built on a hero's lie, but on the painful, careful ground of a truth that nearly destroyed us all. The legacy of Joseph Grant is no longer a monument. It is a warning. And for the first time, our family is free to build something new. So what is the true legacy of a lie? For the Grant family, it was a kind of death, followed by a painful rebirth. We lost the grandfather, the hero, the unchallengeable patriarch. What we gained was messy, complicated, and real. We gained an uncle. We gained the weight of truth, which is heavier than the featherweight of a comfortable fiction. Joseph's story is ultimately about the stories we tell to survive. He returned from a war not just with trauma, but with an opportunity to reinvent himself. He chose the version that made him a hero, a provider, a king. He built that version so convincingly that he spent 50 years defending its borders, sacrificing his own brother to maintain the illusion. The tragedy is that the man he could have been, the one who admitted his fear, who shared his brother's inheritance, who built a smaller, honest life, might have been happier. He might have been loved for who he was, not for who he pretended to be. The photograph of the woman and child in Vietnam is the ghost that will forever haunt this story. It is the final unanswered question. It suggests that the lie we uncovered was perhaps just the first layer. It asks us, how many lives can one secret sustain? How many families across how many oceans can be built on a single act of betrayal? Some truths are like Russian dolls. You open one, only to find another, smaller, more intimate secret waiting inside. For Jimmy, the man who was erased, the legacy is different. His life was not defined by the lie, but by his resilience in spite of it. He found love, raised a family, and maintained a dignity his brother could only mimic. In the end, he offered the one thing Joseph never could: forgiveness. Not forgetfulness, but a conscious decision to stop the poison from spreading to another generation. His legacy is one of quiet strength, a lesson in how to carry pain without letting it define you. Our family dinners are different now. They are quieter. There is less certainty, but there is also less performance. We are careful with our stories. We fact-check our own memories. The price of our new honesty was nearly everything we had. But what remains is ours, truly ours, not purchased with stolen money, but earned through a brutal accounting. The patriarch's confession at that reunion did not just reveal a betrayal. It asked every single one of us a question. What are the stories you're telling yourself? What foundations are you standing on that you've never bothered to inspect? And if the truth came out, not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet whisper tomorrow, what would remain of the life you've built? Some families are built on rock, some on sand. Ours, we discovered, was built on a ghost, and in the end, we had to make peace with the ghost to find solid ground. If you found this journey from lie to truth compelling, there are more stories of secrets, survival, and the families we make and break waiting for you. Subscribe, and we'll continue the exploration. Thanks for watching.